but I do chair the Subcommittee on Emerging Threats and Capabilities, and I prioritize the special operations community and the critical enablers that they provide. In recent years, the Army implemented force reductions within SOF. Despite these cuts, SOCOM has testified last year that the demand for special operations forces remain high. So, Mr. Driscoll, will I get your commitment to work with me to make sure that we're addressing these cuts and how we can continue to provide for our special operations community so that they may further support our conventional forces?
Absolutely, Senator. Our special operators are force multipliers. If you look at the threats ahead, we have a pacing threat in China, but that certainly doesn't mean that other threats wouldn't take advantage of us being in engagement with China. And special forces are incredibly well suited to both lend a hand in that fight, and also with all of our innovation, they are innovation laboratories that can test things more quickly. They can learn and get their procurement lessons and actual lessons learned to the larger force. So I'm incredibly supportive, Senator.
Well, thank you, Mr. Driscoll. And Mr. Chair, I was going to ask him to sing the Army song, but I'll submit that for the record.
Your time has expired, regrettably. Senator, but thank you for your questions. Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I know you served your active duty tour with the Army at Fort Drum, Climb to Glory. A little over a year ago, Fort Drum was selected to host the Army's second multi-domain task force. If confirmed, your tenure as Secretary will align with the Army's target for the full MDTF implementation by fiscal year 28. What challenges do you see in this timeline, and do you believe the split structure of the second MDTF between Germany and Fort Drum is sustainable? And can the structure be leveraged in other theaters such as the Pacific?
Senator, I haven't been specifically briefed on that unit and its bifurcation of location, but the multi-domain rollout across the Army is the future of warfare. If you think of things like cyber and space, how war has been fought up until this point will no longer look the same. Those issues require networked abilities that in near real time or real time allow for communication across a lot of assets and sensing tools and human beings. And so I look forward to both learning more, working with your office, and specifically returning to Fort Drum if confirmed.
Thank you. A recurring challenge that you and I talked about in our meeting for the military has been the recruitment and retention of skilled cyber operators, both military and civilian. As of November, the military reported about 28,000 unfilled military and civilian cyber roles. To help address this, I created the Cyber Service Academy Scholarship Program and secured language in the most recent NDAA to study the advisability of a cyber military service. Army Cyber is the largest of our cyber service components, placing a significant portion of this burden on you. How will you approach the cyber personnel challenge, and how do you see things like the Cyber Service Academy supporting your efforts?
Senator, very sincerely, thank you for your work on this. We are going to have to figure out and work together to create unique pathways for the cyber experts among us to be the most lethal cyber person or soldier. That pathway may look very different from going to Ranger School and ending up in Ranger Battalion. And we need to work with the feeders and the pipelines in the civilian sector to empower those candidates who want to join the Army, those future soldiers to come in. And I think pathways like what you were describing are incredibly valuable.
You will need a capable and qualified principal cyber advisor, but that role has been vacant for nearly 6 months. Will you commit to me to quickly fill that role if you are confirmed?
Senator, that would be one of, if confirmed, one of the roles I'd be most excited to fill. I don't know what has led to the delay in filling it, so I can't speak to that, but I can commit to very early on trying to prioritize that because, as stated earlier, with the way that multi-domain is going and our wars are going to be fought in the future, that will be a critical role. Thank
you. One of the issues that this committee has spent at least a decade working on is the scourge of sexual assault in the military. We put in place bipartisan reforms that had the support of 65 senators. It was overwhelmingly supported. And the reforms are geared towards more transparency, more accountability, more training, and having the decision maker of whether a crime's been committed be given to trained military prosecutor who isn't in the chain of command, who arguably has more precise and applicable training to reach better decisions. Are you aware of these reforms, and do you commit to me that you will do everything to make sure these reforms are fully implemented so that our military can be a functioning place for everyone to work, and that certain people are not, unfortunately, disregarded or devalued because of the system in place?
Very sincerely, Senator. I thank you and your colleagues for the work on this. I mentioned in my opening statement that my 8-year-old son is planning to join the Army. It's hard to know if my 6-year-old daughter wants to join. My wife and I have been nudging her that way, and as much as you can nudge a 6-year-old, I want her to join an Army that the sky's the limit. The standards of excellence are hard, but she is able to achieve them. She faces absolutely 0 instances of sexual harassment during her time in, and it would be an absolute honor, Senator, to work with you in this committee to, from the top, ensure we are both rolling out the law and setting a culture where that is not tolerated in any way.
Thank you. With my last 20 seconds, you mentioned in the questions you gave to the committee that you wanted to appoint a high-level position dedicated to ensuring a focus on ending sexual assault in the military. Do you have any thoughts about what your thinking is there or what you would do for that position?
Senator, I would want to work with you in your office and with your colleague, Senator Ernst. I know you've done a deep dive on this. I want to commit publicly to commit the resources, the time, the energy, and the focus to scourging it from the United States Army, and I think that that could be a powerful first step.
Thank you, Mr. Driscoll. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. Senator Scott.
Morning, Mr. Driscoll. Congratulations on your nomination, and thanks for your willingness to do this. I think I told you my father was one of 3,000 people who did all 4 combat jumps with the 82nd Airborne in the Second World War. He was crazy. After that, he fought in the Battle of the Bulge. My whole childhood, he told me the Germans were horrible, the food was horrible, and the foxholes were horrible. So after high school, I joined the Navy, which we didn't, well, the food wasn't bad, but no Germans, no foxholes. So first, tell me what your experience in the Army, and thank you for your service as Cavalry Scout Platoon Leader. What lessons did you learn that's going to make you a better Secretary of the Army?
Senator, Secretary Hegseth mentioned it in his hearing that the dust on the boots model, I had not thought of that in a long time, but the experiences of being able to think through when a decision from the top comes down, how does it actually impact the soldier? I can think back to our COP outside Baghdad, Iraq, that had 40 of us, and we had these amazing vehicles, which I think probably this committee had a lot of help in getting these MRAPs out. When our soldiers first deployed, the bottom of these Humvees was thin, and it basically perfectly absorbed a blast. And so these MRAPs were created, which saved a lot of lives. But one of the problems with the MRAPs is they were very heavy, very tall, and very prone to roll over. And so I can remember for the entire 9 or 10 months we were at the COP, every couple weeks you'd send a soldier out there, they would start up the MRAP, turn it on, and run the engine for a couple of minutes, and then turn it back off, and then the process would repeat itself. And it wasn't for any sort of malintention, and the actions by those creating it were for good purposes, but just fundamentally the MRAP didn't work in a lot of areas in Iraq because it's muddy, dusty roads that just can't support a lot of weight. And so I think those types of experiences of saying, this may be the right answer some of the time, but what is it actually going to look like for the actual soldier on the ground where we need this? I think that will be a very impactful, or I hope, if confirmed, that will be a very impactful vision.
So I became governor of Florida in January 2011. I had no earthly idea that the Army Corps of Engineers was going to control every bit of development in my state. You know, you couldn't do anything at our ports. You couldn't do anything in our rivers. There's so much the Army Corps of Engineers controlled. And my experience is it's just an absolute black hole. They're wonderful people, but you could never get an answer. Never get an answer about their timeline, never get an answer about why they make the decisions. It was just an absolute black hole. And it's been consistent for my 8 years as governor and my 6 years up here. So I don't know if you spent any time with the Army Corps of Engineers, wonderful people, but for anybody that wants to get anything accomplished in their state, it's just a pain in the royal butt. Have you thought about what you would do to change that?
Senator, one of the amazing parts of the Army is that it does touch so many different parts of both our countrymen's lives and the lives of those abroad. When I talked to your colleague, Senator Warren, one of the things we had talked about is it possible to do something like an NPS score, which is a Net Promoter Score that's pretty common in business. If you went to a Chick-fil-A, you might get a questionnaire afterwards, 0 to 10, how likely would you be to refer this to a friend? And if we could start to do those in our communities where our bases are either abroad or in our communities locally, I think what we would start to find is there are some low-hanging areas that when our soldiers are touching those in our civilian population, there are probably ways that we can just be more responsive. And so I would love, if confirmed, to work with this committee to try to figure out what low-hanging fruit exists to make the Army a better co-inhabitant of the world and our country.
In your private life, have you had to recruit employees, have you recruit people to work with you, try to find how to work with people?
I have, Senator.
So why do you think the Army has such a horrible experience trying to recruit people?
I think that from my experience as a third-generation soldier, what my grandfather would say he joined for, and we all joined during times of war. I think if you asked us, it would have been, we would have said the reason we joined is we didn't want to miss the opportunity to serve our country when it needed us. And I think that very specific story is what a lot of soldiers, women and men, would say is the reason that they joined. I think we have oftentimes lost focus on that and started to focus on things like the benefits, which are all important and they're very valuable reasons to join. But I think for many of America's youth, it is the purpose of getting to serve this amazing nation. And so if confirmed, I would love to work with this committee to clarify that story and tell it more broadly.
Thanks. You'll do a great job.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Driscoll. You've made that point repeatedly during this hearing, and I think it's got quite a bit of validity. Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Reed for holding this hearing. Mr. Driscoll, I'd like to thank you for your service, your willingness to serve again, and for being here with us today. I will take a moment of privilege, like the rest of my colleagues and all Americans. Today, our heart is broken by the events at DCA last night, and I just want to offer my deepest condolences to the families, to the fellow soldiers, to all of those who were lost. And I want to thank our first responders for their immediate action, running to the scene in the dark of night in the iciest of waters to try to save lives. Thank you. Now I'm going to turn to my home state of Nevada and talk a little bit about Hawthorne Army Depot. So, Mr. Driscoll, Nevada's Hawthorne Army Depot is the world's largest ammunition depot and demilitarization facility. The depot stores and demilitarized munitions and ensures that munitions readiness for all of DoD. Despite its size and crucial role that Hawthorne plays, again, the only one in the country, it is in need of continued infrastructure upgrades. Investing more in our munitions depots has only become more important in light of our need to ramp up munitions productions, both to arm Ukraine against Russian aggression and backfill our own stockpiles, for just a few examples. So in recent years, Army's posture hearings, the Secretary and Chief of Staff of the Army made commitments to me to consider new investments in Hawthorne, and I'm happy that the Army is doing so. So, Mr. Driscoll, if confirmed, can I have your commitment to include Hawthorne in Army's future years defense planning or unfunded priority list so that Congress can fund these crucial and critical investments to ensure our munitions readiness?
Senator, our munitions readiness, as I was referencing to your colleagues, is absolutely one of the primary challenges facing us as a nation. As we face the threat of a peer like China, I absolutely commit to, if confirmed, taking a deep dive and look at this topic.
I invite you to come to Hawthorne and see what they're doing there. How's that?
It would be an honor, ma'am.
Thank you. I want to move now to women in combat, because prior to women being able to serve in combat arms, cultural support teams, largely from the Army Reserve, embedded with Special Operations Forces in Iraq and Afghanistan to engage with female populations. They fill critical gaps, significantly expanding operation and intelligence collection capabilities. However, in so many cases, their military records do not reflect that they served in combat, despite accompanying SOF on raids and sustaining injuries, some even dying. This is because their reserve units, who oversaw them administratively, were not there to document their service in combat. So in some instances, these women have no record of ever having left the base, despite having done so as a job requirement. As a result, they've all struggled to prove to the VA that their injuries are service-related, they're combat-connected, and since women have only been able to serve in combat arms in the last decade. So if confirmed, will you commit to performing a review of these combat veterans, these women who embed overseas to help us collect this important cultural intelligence, Army records? We must have them be accurate. These women come home and they're denied their disability claims because of the lack of documentation. They really need to receive the care and the benefits, their families as well, and the recognition that they deserve. And it's the least that we owe to our women in uniform.
Senator, we have a sacred duty to care for our soldiers. And from my experience deploying, some of the most competent, heroic people I deployed with were women. They served incredibly important jobs with bomb-sniffing dogs, searching out IEDs. They were right beside us every step of the way. And so I absolutely commit to working with your office to make sure that that population is not forgotten and gets the care and respect that they deserve.
Thank you. I'm proud to serve with some women who showed their valor in times of need as well. I just have another moment, so we'll submit this for the record, but it's about cyber workforce development. It's been touched on here, the FY24 NDAA, and did include my bipartisan legislation authorizing the Army to create a civilian cybersecurity reserve to provide cybercom with qualified civilian personnel for surge capacity in times of need, to ensure the U.S. government has the cyber talent needed to respond to malicious activities, secure DoD's informations and systems. We're all trying in so many ways to really build up that force. I will take the answer off the record, but I'd like to speak with you about the implementation of the Civilian Cyber Reserve Corps and have your commitment to see this through, as we know cyber attacks are on the rise.
If confirmed, it would be an honor to speak about that, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Driscoll, welcome and congratulations on your important nomination. You bring a unique background in business and private equity, and one of the biggest things that we have to accomplish in this moment is innovation at the Pentagon. I wonder if you could talk about your background and how that uniquely helps you help us create better innovation in our national security.
Senator, after attending law school on the GI Bill, I was fortunate enough to spend time as a CEO at a venture capital firm where for a couple of years I got to spend time working with and learning and seeing how some of our country's most amazing innovators are building their businesses. And some of the lessons that they have learned in the private space over the last 10 to 20 years, I think are ripe for transferal to the United States Army. Creating a feedback loop and a learning loop that gets lessons learned from the actual soldiers in the field back into the manufacturers or the software developers occurs in the private space frequently. I think it is a little bit less frequent in the Army. There are examples of this, I think, working wonderfully in the Army, like the IVAS system, as I understand it, is kind of a shining beacon of effective development. And so what I'm hoping to do, if confirmed, Senator, is work with this committee and the Army's existing leaders to figure out where can we tighten the innovation loop and get the learnings from the field and the learnings from our friends in places like Ukraine. I mean, that battlefield is ripe with lessons around drones and cyber, and how can we get those lessons into our procurement processes and on the manufacturing floor as quickly as possible?
Part of working in venture capital and when it comes to innovation is thinking outside of the box. And we have a major crisis in the military right now, especially with the United States Army, with a historic recruitment crisis. I know you've already covered this, but give us more specific ideas that we can use new technologies and innovation to recruit the best and brightest of the next generation to serve our country.
I think if you look, Senator, there are a lot of tools used by some of our larger corporations in the country to recruit at scale, but give a very individualized and personalized experience. what I have heard with the recruiting process is they are looking at all sorts of different ways of creating a specialty where a recruiter, if you're an incredible recruiter, perhaps that can be how you serve your country for your entire time in uniform. Things like that that mimic the expertise that can be developed in the private sector, applying those best lessons and processes to the Army, I think will continue to unlock what has seemed to be, no doubt a lot because of the work of this committee, a forward momentum in recruiting in the Army right now.
Secretary Hegseth has talked at length about restoring the meritocracy to our military. And I happen to believe that the recruitment crisis facing the military today has a lot to do with taking merit out of the military. Young men and women say, "What why would I join the military if it's no longer the great meritocracy that it used to be?" So I think restoring that would be important to the Army. And on that note, last year the Army argued that affirmative action at our service academies was, quote, critical to mission success and national security. And when I asked the Secretary of the Army, Wormuth, last year in the House Armed Services Committee, where I previously served, whether the Supreme Court harmed national security when it banned affirmative action at schools with ROTC programs, she admitted she was, quote, a little puzzled why affirmative action at West Point wasn't also banned. Mr. Driscoll, do racial admission preferences at service academies like West Point help our national security?
I don't believe so.
And you would support efforts, as Secretary Hegseth has talked about as well, to end affirmative action at our service academies,
I think
especially at West Point.
I think one of the most amazing parts of my time in service is the Army, in my experience, was an incredible meritocracy. I can't remember a single time being in where anyone thought that the system was against them. And when I have told our kids, Daniel and Lila, about this, what we hope that they will do after high school, I have told my daughter it would be the proudest day of my life, and I don't think she understands the nuance of what I'm saying, to pin a Ranger tab on her if she can complete Ranger school, with the incredibly difficult standards being the exact same as when I went through. And so I think that those standards and excellence that the Secretary of Defense has talked about are important. It's what makes our Army great. It's what's made our Army the greatest land fighting force in the last 249 years on the planet Earth, and I hope that we're able to hold those standards going forward.
You bring a lot to the table. I'm excited to work with you to make the Army as strong as it can possibly be, fix the recruitment crisis, and modernize the Army for the future. Thank you for agreeing to serve our country. You have my full support.
Thank you very much, Senator Banks. Mr. Driscoll, I've said that the United States military is the greatest civil rights organization in the history of the world. What do you think about that?
My experience, Senator, is the exact same.
Yes, having served in the Air Force, that's been my experience. And so I do appreciate that. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Driscoll, congratulations on your nomination to serve as the Secretary of the Army. And I want to thank you for your service to our nation, as well as thank you for the time that we spent in my office earlier. We addressed a number of concerns, and I think you had a very fruitful discussion, so I appreciate that. As you know, senior officials and combatant commands have testified before this committee on the severe threat that's posed by PRC-sponsored cyber actors. The threat is evidenced by the Salt Typhoon, the recent infiltration of U.S. telecommunication companies that left civilians, service members, and installations vulnerable to these attacks. The attack is part of a broader pattern of PRC cyber aggression targeting U.S. infrastructure across the country. The U.S. Army plays a critical role in deterring these threats through defensive cyber operations, through intelligence, integration with U.S. Cyber Command as well to protect us. So my question for you, sir, is do you agree with the Army's current cyber strategy?
Senator, I think the cyber threat to this country, I was actually beside one of our elected officials when we found out our phones were hacked, and I was reflecting with them that all that we do to protect our information and keep it classified, if things like our Verizon cell phone network are going to be compromised, we have to think through a lot of the ways that we've designed our information protection systems. Cyber, with the changes occurring with quantum computing, the changes with generative AI, these are fundamentally going to alter how soldiers fight wars, how information is exchanged on the battlefield, how we prepare, and then the kind of gray zone activities that our peers like China are able to do through cyber are scary. I have not received a formal brief, but my understanding is that the Army actually is taking steps in the right direction. I look forward to learning more and working with your office, as I know this is close to your heart, to make the Army as effective as it can, both on offense and defense and cyber.
So it's just specifically about the strategy, because certainly we're in total agreement with the statement that you made. But as far as the strategy that the Army is using now, I mean, what's your assessment, and would you change anything to support operations with what you know of the strategy now?
My understanding now, Senator, is that our offensive capabilities are perhaps not where they should be, and I think our adversaries are being much more aggressive with us than we are with them, and I would want to take a deep look at that.
The intelligence systems play a pivotal role in informing commanders' decisions, and the adoption of AI is changing that dramatically. Question to you is about the AI implementation strategy that the Army currently has. Do you have any changes, or do you believe the Army is adequately evaluating this threat and adapting accordingly?
Senator, my understanding of how AI implementation is occurring is that it is siloed right now. I think that this is the type of work that should occur across the different services. Our lessons learned for the Army will apply to the Air Force and apply to the Navy. And so I think we need to be focusing on this AI threat, because the speed and the pace of the growth here is unbelievable. I don't know if you read the article about the Chinese startup that basically was able to, I think it was between $4 and $10 million,
right.
1/10,000th of the cost, or 1/1000th of the cost of what some of our American companies were able to develop. 6-month trailing. It is not going to be the pacing and the timeline on this is not going to allow us to be slow, and so we're going to need to be at the front curve of it.
So that leaves the question that how do we stay at that front curve? Because you're right, things are changing dramatically. Traditionally, the Army or any of the services, innovation has not moved as quickly as it has in the civilian side, and the civilian side, innovation is only accelerating, including our adversaries, as you mentioned. So how would you engage with small businesses and other innovators to shake up the procurement process and make sure we're on the forefront of AI development, for example?
I'm optimistic, Senator. I think from what I've seen since being the president's nominee, we have had a lot of interest from Silicon Valley and other places in the country for innovators at small companies, medium companies, and some of the big ones that want to get in the game on behalf of our country. I think having very deliberate conversations with them about how do we get into their R&D pipeline, how do we partner with them early on, so as they're training these models, the Army, as I understand it today, is getting access to these models once they go public. China and our other threats are also getting access to those models. There's no reason that, from my understanding, we couldn't be getting access earlier. And so instead of having a 6-month lead, perhaps there are ways we could have a 9 or 12-month lead on these things. And so I think those conversations could be important, and I would look forward to working with your office to have them.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, like everyone else, am praying for all the family members and thinking about the crew of the Black Hawk and all the people that we lost last night. I would like to caution that before we start calling it a training accident, that we have better idea of what exactly happened, because a training accident has very specific definitions. So please be careful about that. It tends to then start to blame the pilots, and frankly, our military pilots are some of the best trained in the world. Earlier this week, the Trump administration imposed a funding freeze on all federal grants and loans. Even though the OMB memo was rescinded yesterday, the freeze has not been rescinded. Mr. Driscoll, what is your position on the legality of that funding freeze?
Senator, before answering your question, I very sincerely, last night I was sitting watching what occurred on TV with a friend from 10th Mountain who was the down chopper, one of the platoons that had to deal with that in Afghanistan, and watching the struggle and heartbreak as he had to relive those moments. We actually reflected in the moment. I want to take a quick moment to say very sincerely, thank you for your service. I know it was an immense sacrifice, soldier to soldier, I'm sorry for what you've had to go through. To your question, the legality of the, would you mind repeating it?
Was the order from President Trump, his current order to pause all grant funding legal?
Senator, I haven't been able to take a good, deep enough look to know whether it was legal or not, but I would not believe that the president would issue an illegal order.
You don't believe that the President of the United States can issue an illegal order?
I don't believe President Trump would do that, Senator.
So, okay, that leads me to my next question. If President Trump directed you to do something illegal, would you refuse to obey?
I reject the premise of the question, Senator, that he would, but I would not, I would only follow lawful orders.
And constitutional ones?
And constitutional ones.
Okay. If confirmed, will you commit to dispersing all obligated grant funding from the Department of the Army on time and without delay?
I would follow all lawful requirements of my job if confirmed, Senator.
Okay. I'd like to follow up on our meeting last week. To be candid, you performed very poorly in your conversation with me. I asked you, for example, how many personnel are in a division, and you told me 3,500. You just recently, when I came in, were answering my colleague from Alaska's questions about brigade combat teams. How many personnel are in an average brigade combat team?
Senator, I imagine the purpose of this question is to get to my qualifications as a leader.
No, I want you to answer the question.
Senator.
What is the, do you not know? If you don't know, that's okay.
Senator, I assume.
Answer my question. How many personnel are in because you performed very well today, and I've been impressed because it looks like you actually did some homework, but you spoke with conviction about the number of brigade combat teams that the Army needs to be effective. Can you tell me how many soldiers are in a brigade combat team?
35,
on average.
3,500.
Great, thank you. See, that would have been so much easier, but I know you're filibustering, I get it. What's FM 3-0?
Senator, I believe all of these questions are going to be
What is
intended.
FM 3-0?
I actually was reading it last night, Senator. It's the Army's
Excellent.
training manual.
Operations.
Operations manual.
Fantastic. I'm glad you're doing your homework. See, this is working because you're doing your homework, which you did not do because you couldn't name a country in Africa where we have troops when I asked you.
Senator,
What is your views on force posture generally and the components and elements of force posture, as well as your understanding of the Army's current force posture?
Senator, I believe that the President of the United States chose me specifically because of my experience set that your colleagues
You're not
have
answering. Does
referenced.
that mean that you do not have an opinion on the Army's current force posture? It's my job. It's my job to advise and consent on the nominees that the President puts forward. Just because a President puts forward a nominee does not mean that person is automatically qualified to do the job. My question to you is, sir, as someone who will become Secretary of Army if confirmed, what is your current opinion of the Army's force posture, and can you describe the elements of that force posture?
Absolutely, Senator. And to your Africa comment, West Africa and Horn of Africa, and that was, I did study after you asked me that question, so I'm grateful for the question.
Answer my question on force posture.
We need to be prepared, Senator, for a threat from China up here that we have not.
I'm not asking you about near-peer threats. I'm asking you about the force posture.
We need our forces postured all over the world to
What are the
respond.
components of the force posture?
Senator, I believe that the
The
question.
answer is military disposition, strength, and condition and readiness of the military. It's in FM 3-0 operations, which you were reading last night. Can you outline for me the key capabilities of the Army is supposed to provide the combatant command?
Senator, you can ask that question for the record. Your time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rescued by the chairman.
Senator Budd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman, I'm sorry. Mr. Chairman, can I add FM 3-0, the Army's operations manual for the record, include in the record?
Without objection, but let me ask you this. How many pages does that consist of?
It's quite a few pages, actually, but it's a basic reading for anybody who's gone through the officer's basic course, which I believe you have completed. Have you not, Mr. Driscoll?
Senator, it's 350 pages approximately.
There you go.
So you really do want us to go to the expense of reprinting something that's widely available? Could we just refer to it?
That is acceptable to me, Mr.
All
Chairman.
right, thank you very much. Senator Budd.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. And again, welcome, Mr. Driscoll. It's good to see you. You know, as a fellow North Carolinian, I know And as you, someone who served in the Army, I know our hearts are broken with the recent flight, with the air crew, the Black Hawk. Having a family of Army aviation and Army aviators, my hearts are especially broken. You know, I want to congratulate you as a friend. It's been good to know you for several years. And this is a great role that you've been nominated to. And I'm proud to see someone born and raised in North Carolina, particularly Western North Carolina, to serve in this role. So many from the Army were serving there in days following recent Hurricane Helene. Mr. Driscoll, in your advanced policy questions, you identify recruiting as one of the most significant challenges facing the Army. So if confirmed, how would you recommend the Army fix this recruiting challenge?
Senator, I had mentioned to your colleagues a couple of things that the Army has done really well, as it seems from the outside.
Right.
The Future Soldier Training course at Fort Jackson, where I did basic training, that prepares soldiers to take their ASVAB test and get more prepared fitness from their fitness, get more fit before they go to basic training, has seemed to pay dividends. That type of thing, that type of innovation, I think could be spread farther around the country to continue to increase the pipeline of the population that is qualified. But more specifically, I think telling the story of the United States Army with its 250th anniversary coming up this summer is an incredible time through our JRTCs, through our communities across the country, to build up the pipeline of freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors in high school who can join. This is the year to tell the story of the women and the men in uniform who have done amazing things on behalf of our country and who I think would say, like me, had their lives changed by this experience. So, Senator, I look forward to working with you and this committee have confirmed to make this year the Army's best recruiting year in history.
I look forward to that as well. Thank you. As you know, Special Operations Forces, and I think you spoke about this with some of my colleagues prior to me, but they're essential in responding to irregular warfare. North Carolina is home, and for the purpose of this morning, maybe we'll call it Fort Bragg. And Special Operations Forces, Special Operations are now playing a larger role in the cyber and the space domains. Yet the Army recently decided to cut a significant number of Army Special Operations Forces. So in your advanced policy questions, you state that Army Special Forces play a critical role in supporting the joint force and accomplishing the objectives of the National Defense Strategy. So do you believe that SOF is still relevant today?
Wholeheartedly, Senator. And just from my kind of qualitative experience, the special operators that I was fortunate enough to serve alongside of were some of the most incredible soldiers that I ever saw. They were innovation laboratories, testing out all sorts of new things, from new weapons to backpacks to whatever it was. And a lot of the lessons that they learned, even if it wasn't formal, trickled down to the larger force. And so, Senator, I think unequivocally on a go-forward basis, they are a crucial force multiplier for our Army.
Well, thank you. In my recent visits there to Fort Liberty, Fort Bragg, I have seen the same thing continuing today, and I know you'll see that very soon if confirmed. As you work to address recruiting more broadly, what strategies will you pursue to increase the pool of recruits so that they're eligible and have qualifications to serve in Army Special Operations Forces positions?
Senator, my understanding, which I had covered with one of your colleagues, was one of the problems with what we've done by digitizing medical records is accidentally we have taken people who have broken arms but have been an ultramarathoner or who have had an inhaler prescribed when they were 13 in a day. These were the types of things that for 249 years or 244 of those years just would have never come up. Either you wouldn't have remembered to put it down or your recruiter would have told you it wasn't relevant. And right now it is blocking a lot of possible soldiers who I believe would be incredible future soldiers. And so I think taking a deep dive on the incentive structure for how we do waivers and maybe working with this committee to look back at, should some of these things, should flat feet still be preventative of joining? I don't have an opinion on the matter, but I think it's worth a fresh look.
Thank you. And again, I appreciate your willingness to serve our country, and I wish you the best.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much, Mr. Driscoll. Before I recognize Senator Hirono, I want to make sure I get this straight. As a Mississippi young man, I joined the Air Force and was stationed at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in Goldsboro, North Carolina. You would agree, would you not, that Eastern North Carolina barbecue is far superior to Lexington type barbecue?
I would ask you not to answer the question, sir.
So as someone from Western North Carolina, Senator, my heart bleeds the thick ketchup-based barbecue that I grew up with, but I can concede that Lexington barbecue is exceptional.
Well, there's no accounting for taste, but a pretty good answer. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did want to take a moment to extend my condolences to all those affected by the tragic accident last night near Reagan National Airport and the brave Army soldiers on board the helicopter. Mr. Driscoll, I asked the following two initial questions of all nominees to come before any of the committees on which I sit to ensure the fitness of the nominees. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
Never.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement relating to this kind of conduct?
Never.
Mr. Driscoll, several of the critical training areas that the Army uses in Hawaii are leased from the state, including Pohakaloa, and the leases are set to expire in 2029. These leases are vital to ensuring military forces can adequately train in the Pacific. However, the land involved also holds cultural significance to the Native Hawaiian community. How do you plan to approach these important lease renegotiations, and will you commit to engaging in good faith with state officials and the community to ensure that the leases are negotiated in a way that is fair to the state, the people of Hawaii, and the military?
Senator, this is an incredibly important issue, not just in Hawaii, but in all the places we engage with the community and sign leases. I would absolutely commit to wanting to work with your office and then to engage with community members to ensure the Army is being its best neighbor that it can be. Earlier in the hearing, I was referencing with your colleague that Senator Warren and I were chatting about this, both kind of abroad, how the Army exists in its footprint, but then specifically domestically, how the Army and its soldiers and the civilians that work on the bases engage with the community and the youth in that community is directly correlated to who gets a taste of what the Army has to offer and who gets to see what a life in the Army can do for them. And so I think it is both the right thing to do and the selfish thing to do to be the best community members we can be.
I want to particularly emphasize how important these negotiations are and how they are conducted, because the military of late has been criticized for what happened at Red Hill, basically involving the Navy. But as far as the community is concerned, what happens to one service is something that impacts all of the other services. So it is really critical that you engage with the community. So going to modernizing DoD infrastructure is one of my top priorities, and the Army has a deep backlog of maintenance and modernization for its facilities. And sadly, for example, in Hawaii, 50% of Army facilities are classified as failing or failed, and the cost to repair or replace them is over $5 billion. This is just involving Hawaii. So we need to have a functioning infrastructure critical to military readiness. How are you planning to address the Army's infrastructure issue in Hawaii and in the greater Indo-Pacific?
Senator, I've had many friends stationed in Hawaii, and though the experience has been good, I think that they might echo that some of the maintenance issues exist. We owe a duty to our soldiers and their families. It is my daughter, my 6-year-old Lila, is named after my E6's daughter, Lila. She lives on military.
So, Mr. Driscoll, my time is running out, and so what I am getting from you is that there is a a commitment to deal with the lagging infrastructure throughout the military in the Army. So I will certainly be holding you to that, should you be confirmed. Let me get to mass deportations. President Trump has already ordered thousands of additional Army soldiers to the southern border. Experts have said deporting over 11 million people, these are the people who are undocumented, will require tens of thousands of personnel, hundreds of billions of dollars, and years to complete. The Army is the primary military service who would be called upon to support a mass deportation order. What impact would deploying tens of thousands of troops have on Army readiness?
Senator, my understanding from the outside is that the Army stands by and stands ready to support the president's mission to defend the border.
Well, if you
and
have
that
to deploy 10,000 people or more from the Army to do that, I would say that it is going to impact Army readiness for the other purposes for which the Army is stood up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I agree. Actually, Joe Biden letting in 15 million people here necessitating the mass deportations is a problem. But Bill Clinton deported 12 million people. Barack Obama deported 8 million people. So deportations, they may have been suspended over the last 4 years, but is exactly what people voted for. They're tired of the lawlessness. But for you, thanks for being here, and thanks for your willingness to serve. As you know, I am very supportive of your nomination. I think you're going to do a great job, and I think you're going to provide a great perspective for what the Army really needs. And I think your energy and your attitude and the way you explain, why you served, and I think a way forward to improve recruiting is actually, I've not heard that before. You hear it from soldiers, and you hear it from people who are actually serving, but for somebody that's serving in your capacity, I think it's a great way to sort of frame the importance of the recruitment challenges that we have and how we get beyond it. I do want to ask about Fort Leonard Wood. We talked about it. Missouri, we're really blessed to have Fort Leonard Wood in our state. It's pretty uniquely situated in that it's in a rural setting with the Mark Twain Forest. You got a lot of room. And I think that maneuverability that you get and the versatility that you get, and including from other branches in law enforcement to train there, is a pretty unique asset. So just a couple of questions on that. There's been some talk, and I mentioned this to you, not really from the Army, but from the Defense Health Agency. There's a hospital there that's really important, not just to the base, but to the community there. And there's been some discussion about downgrading that to some sort of health clinic. Will you commit to working with me to make sure that that doesn't happen? I think they've sort of backtracked from that, but that would be devastating for the Fort Leonard Wood community. Is that something we can work on?
Senator, it would be an honor to work with your office. And as somebody who grew up in the mountains, North Carolina, and my wife is a physician, access to health care is a real thing. If you take that access away, it can completely change how a community is able to function. And so this is an important issue, and I would look forward to working with you if confirmed.
And can you talk a little bit about the benefits of having a sort of centrally located base like that at Fort Leonard Wood? You've got all the real estate you need. There's been significant upgrades made, hundreds of millions of dollars pumped into the new housing there. So, for the long term, it's a great place for us to kind of stage operations. A lot of people get their early training there. But why that is important to the Army to have a base like that?
My understanding, Senator, of your description, and if confirmed, I'd be honored to visit it with you, is the base can scale for future needs that we just don't know about. In a lot of areas, the bases are constrained by what's around them. This base seems to have the ability that if we needed it in 1 day, 1 year, or 10 years, to scale for things we don't quite know what we need. We don't know where our soldiers need to be positioned. We don't know what our testing requirements will be. Fort Leonard Wood seems like an amazing place to be able to expand.
Well, the folks back home will be happy to hear that you want to come by. And Missouri barbecue is the best in the country, so we'll make sure you get some of that. My Texas friends and Carolina friends may disagree, but they're wrong. They're wrong. I want to ask, we talked a little bit in my office, but and others may have touched on this too, but clearly our chief adversary is China.
And so the Army is sort of reorienting itself a little bit for this challenge. And can you talk about how you see it and some things that, if you were just talking to somebody on the street about what the Army's traditionally done and what it's going to need to do in the future to prepare for what could potentially be, you know, this struggle, of course, for the 21st century?
Absolutely, Senator. My time in and deployed, and I think my friends who deployed to Afghanistan and my experience in Iraq, most of the movements were squad-level movements. So you would have, call it, 15 to 25 men and women doing most actions. The logistics, getting things in and out of the countries was less contested. If you needed water or fuel, you could get it from the continental United States to those theaters quickly and relatively easily. An engagement with a peer like China will be a completely and totally different thing than I have seen in my time on the planet Earth. Everything can be contested. It is a peer adversary who will do everything they can to defeat us. And this requires let's call it a pre-wartime footing for us as an army and us as a people to get ourselves ready to engage in a conflict that could fundamentally alter our future way of life if we're not ready for it.
Thank you. And as you know, I support you, and I think you're going to do a great job. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Schmidt, and thank you, Mr. Driscoll. We appreciate your answers to the questions today, and we appreciate your willingness to serve. We will now close the hearing for the information of our members. Questions for the record will be due to the committee within 2 business days of the conclusion of this hearing. And with that, if there's no objection, we are adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.